you have a new Substack newsletter, Making New Worlds, which, the same previous name from the podcast.
Yep.
Very accessible, very cool, weekly brain dumps of kind of things thinking about space. Just a few headlines: head in the stars, feet on the ground, lunar barriers and intercultural respect, ethics and NASA's Moon to Mars program, social spin-off technology. So talk us a little bit about, you have a book, you wrote it, you did the hard work of the podcasting and the ideas, like you said, then you edited a book, trying to, forward, you're part of the Just Space, Alliance, etc. How are you kind of envisioning, like you mentioned a second ago, about broadcasting or kind of amplifying other people's work? And then also, how do you see yourself now in this kind of science communicator role? And how do you deal with the issues of responsibility and things like that?
Yeah, you've really nailed it. That I feel like my one of my primary goals to have as my purpose in this space is as a science communicator, which is not something I thought of myself much as when I was a
Sure.
scientist. I really enjoyed just sitting behind a computer and coding, which is what I do for my day job. None of this is my day
Oh,
job.
we'll talk about Universe Sandbox too.
but,
So
but uh, but for this, because I don't have this background, this I'll say technical training in things like philosophy or history, I don't feel as qualified to dive into any one tech, one specific subfield. But I feel like I've kind of positioned myself to try to explain a lot of these topics at a larger level, a higher level, a broader level, to people like myself thinking about these things and want to maybe see how to apply them to their own work in the technical fields. And so that is my goal. The newsletter, I will admit, came about because my publicist at MIT Press, excellent publicist that I've been able to work with, said, you have to start a newsletter. It's the best
it's
way
a
to
thing.
market a book. And I said, I hate email newsletters. And she said, okay, well, this is my professional advice. So, and I
Yeah.
realized I set a very ambitious goal for myself to make a weekly newsletter. I'm starting off at least trying to make a weekly newsletter. It's been running for several months now. Part of the goal was to say, hey, I have a book coming out, you should pre-order it. But then it turned out that I did have a bit more to say. And in particular, I had been kind of stressing about the fact that when you write a book, it takes a while from the moment you write a chapter to the moment it's in someone's hands. It can take a
Oh,
couple of
sure.
years.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I was writing all this based on podcasts I'd started back in 2017. So by the time the book came out, it felt a little out of date to me because so much about the space industry is moving so quickly. And so the
Yep.
newsletter also gives me the opportunity to keep up with comments and pointing out different aspects of more recent changes in my own thinking and in the industry as it keeps evolving. I am interested though in using the newsletter at some point once I get a little more organized about it, to do that amplification of voices that I was talking about. One thing I'd
Yeah.
like to do with that newsletter, or potentially the Just Space Alliance also has a quarterly newsletter that we try to get guest posts for that newsletter.
Okay. Yep.
And so if I manage to build a little platform for myself, which I do have a little platform at this point, I'd love to be able to include Q&As and interviews,
Sure.
and guest pieces by all the different people working. I love meeting people working with one of the best things about the Just Space Alliance. Luciana and I talk about this a lot. We have a board of directors. They're fantastic. Alice Gorman is on our board of directors. And our favorite thing every year is when new board members get voted on and we get to talk to them. And we just go, these are just the coolest people. So many great people out there working on so many different aspects of these problems. So yeah, I'm hoping that I can sort of transition into more of an amplification of these voices. Because I don't want to just come up with all this stuff myself. That would be a waste. And there's great work being done out there.
Yeah, no, there really is. So, we won't get into, I guess, personal opinions of the billionaire who owns the platform, but what do you think about kind of these changes of waves of trends of social media, of terms of like amplification of networking effects? Because obviously there's a power there. Obviously there, I wouldn't have this podcast without Twitter. Like every single person I've kind of reached out to, engaged with, shared things with. But then at the same time, recently, obviously, much more intensely, more recently, is, what are some other alternatives? Obviously, seeing Mastodon with a big academic kind of following and et cetera, but then Blue Sky. How are you thinking about not just, a newsletter, but then in general, like, because you just mentioned kind of Q&As, talks, and interviews. What are you kind of alluding to? Is it more kind of that personal in real life, kind of, hey, like we're in this together kind of thing, with a high technical digital background or framework to facilitate that. And so how are you thinking about it, moving forward? Because obviously a Substack newsletter is fantastic, but that also was 2-3 years ago, myself included. So what's kind of the new thing? Is it maybe working in some VR or new kind of mediums? Is it, again, like you said, just amplifying voices consistently? How are you thinking about it in general?
I like your implication that I've thought about this at all. Number one, I do not recommend having a book come out right as the major social media platform for book marketing changes hands.
Good
Not
luck
a choice
with
I
it.
would have made. Although it's probably healthier for me because I didn't do as much presence on Twitter as I would have otherwise. And Twitter is honestly kind of unhealthy for anyone's mental health. I got onto Twitter as a scientist because it was a really great way to communicate with other astronomers at
100%.
conferences. And it's been useful for that. And it is still extremely useful for me to be introduced to new ideas and new writers and thinkers. And it's been great for that. However, there's only a small fraction of people in the world who are actually on Twitter. It feels like the whole world because there's so many reporters and scientists and things on there, but it's not the whole world. And so it's been healthy for me to step back and say, okay, where else are people talking about things?
Sure.
Books are certainly one way to do it. There are people who have read my book who haven't thought about any of this stuff just because they're a friend of mine or whatnot. And now they can have these conversations with their peers and they're not on Twitter. They don't subscribe to my newsletter. The newsletter's been great because everyone who's an author with a newsletter will tell you this. People who read your newsletter have opted in to hear your thoughts. So you can at least count on that you're not shouting into a void. But really what I love the most, especially as my work through Just Space. Just Space, we tried being a little more present on social media, but it was very draining for Lucianne and I, who both have day jobs. And it didn't feel the way that we wanted it to feel. And what I realized, I think, is that what I really get out of the Just Space Alliance is the alliance part of it, the network aspect of it. And so conversations are my favorite part. I've really enjoyed podcast interviews as part of this book marketing process more than anything else I've done. Because I love the conversation. I love when people reach out to us from their organizations and say, can we partner with the Just Space Alliance? Can we put a project together? And working on projects together, I think, is even better than having a conversation. And we're hoping to do things like other conferences and more meetings in person and virtually, where those conversations and collaborations to actually do work can happen. And to me, that's a better use of my time. It is big use of my time, but it's a better use of my time than coming up with the best marketing strategy on whatever the next big social media network is.
Yeah, true. And so with Just Space Alliance, the mission is to advocate for a more inclusive and ethical future in space and to harness visions of tomorrow for a more just and equitable world today. And so three ways you guys do that: guidance and resources, community engagement, inspiration, and critical thinking. We kind of talked about the community engagement. For resources and guidance, is it more like you were just talking about, like amplifying voices, content, those kind of things? What is kind of the inspirational and critical thinking aspect of that? Because I think also that alludes to what you were talking about before, of having still a positivist, optimistic vision of space, and we can still kind of do this with equitability and accessibility, et cetera. So can you go into a little deeper on how you guys are doing that?
So aside from the conferences, I'm working on putting together a virtual conference right now. It's going slowly. It's hard work, but that's something I'm excited about. But we're also working on, we'd like to make more resources for people that because there are some great resources out there. We've tried to curate some of them on our website. There's also a great website called the Space Epic Library that you can go and look at a lot of space resources. But we're trying to build more toolkits for organizations who are trying to do a better job with whatever work they're doing. Lucianne right now is working on a couple of exciting projects for that.
Very cool.
So that's one aspect of what we do. And partnership is another one. Not just, hey, we want to partner with the Just Space Alliance, but we have a lot of organizations who come to us and say, hey, we're looking for someone who can help us do X. So we're a bunch of engineering students who want to put on an art exhibit about space and engineering. Can you connect us with any artists? And we'll connect them that way. And that's been really rewarding. As for inspiration, this comes a little bit from the second half of our mission statement, which is really important to me. The idea that we're harnessing people's, we say visions of tomorrow, but it's really their excitement for space, to get them to connect with the problems in the world around them. And one thing I found really fascinating, even in myself through doing this work, is that by thinking about these societal issues in the context of space, it lets you escape from the limited worldview that I have on Earth, the limited view of what's possible. One example that I always give from the podcast is about criminal justice in space. I hadn't really ever thought critically about criminal justice. I'm a white American. I haven't had to. And then the more I thought about the issues in space and I talked to criminologists and prison abolitionists, I realized not only are prisons going to be impractical in space, but they're also going to be unethical, and they're unethical in a lot of ways on Earth. So what should we do about that? And by talking to these activists, I realized there are a lot of alternatives to the prison system that would work well in space, which then let me say, well, maybe they'd work well on Earth too. And again, as an American, it's even if you don't think prisons are the best way to do things, it's really hard to imagine how we get there from where we are now. But you can escape that constraint by thinking about this sort of sci-fi context, and it lets you reimagine and come up with more radical solutions on Earth. So that's really what the second half of that mission statement means to me, and that's something that we work on as well. And also just trying to get people to imagine a better future instead of just worrying about dystopias. This is something I've learned from climate change activists, is you can't just scare people and tell people that the world is going to end. I mean, it's important to help them realize the dangers, but if you only do that, then psychologically they just get trapped in indecision and in fear. You have to give them a better future, a better vision of the future to work towards. And that's something I've really taken to heart. And I think that's important when we think about our future in space as well.